My name is Marco, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the local pizza baker. People in town love my pies, the secret recipes handed down through my family for generations. But lately, things have changed. I'm not sure how or when it started, but there's a strange, cold feeling that's settled over my pizzeria. Something isn't right. It was late one night, long after I'd closed up shop. The streets outside were quiet, too quiet. I was cleaning up the kitchen, scraping the last bits of flour from the counter, when the bell above the front door jingled. I froze. No one should have been there. I walked to the front, expecting maybe a lost customer or some drunk stumbling in, but no one was there. The door was wide open, the cold night air creeping in. I shut the door and locked it again, double-checking this time. But as I turned around, something caught my eye. There, in the middle of one of the empty tables, was a pizza box. I hadn't made any deliveries that night, nor had anyone picked up an order. My hands trembled as I walked over and lifted the lid. Inside there was a single slice of pizza, but it wasn't any pizza I recognized. The cheese bubbled unnaturally, and the pepperoni, it wasn't pepperoni. It was something else. It almost looked like pieces of flesh. My stomach turned, and the scent that wafted up from the box was sour, rotten. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The kitchen door creaked open, even though I knew it was locked. The smell grew stronger, almost unbearable now. I stepped back, my heart racing. That's when I saw him. A shadowy figure stood in the doorway of the kitchen, its face hidden in the dark. "Marco," a voice rasped, low and broken. I staggered back, dropping the box. Who are you?" My voice shook as much as my hands. The figure stepped into the light, and I nearly collapsed. It was my father. But not the father I knew. His skin was pale, eyes sunken deep into his skull, lips pulled back into a grotesque smile. He had been dead for years. "Why did you leave me?" he asked, his voice crawling over my skin like spiders. "You left us, Marco, and now you'll join us." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I stumbled backward as he came closer. The smell of decay clung to him, stronger with every step. My back hit the wall, and I knew I had nowhere to run. Suddenly, the room filled with the sound of dozens of voices whispering in unison, chanting my name, calling me home. I shut my eyes tight, trying to block it all out, praying that this was just some nightmare. But when I opened them again, my father was inches from my face, his cold breath on my skin. "Time to finish the recipe," he whispered. I screamed, bolting for the door, throwing it open and running out into the street. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment, slamming the door behind me, locking it and collapsing on the floor. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I had just seen. The next morning I returned to the pizzeria. The box was gone. The door was locked, just as I'd left it. Everything seemed normal, but I know it wasn't. That night, when I went to close up again, the box was back, and inside, another slice waited. This time, it had my name carved into it. I can't escape. The voices keep calling. The faces in the shadows, they watch me. And the worst part, every night the pizza slices grow more familiar. They're coming for me, one slice at a time.
My name is Daniel, and I never believed in ghosts until I boarded the Titanic. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a luxury cruise recreating the infamous voyage. The ship was modeled after the original Titanic, with every detail meticulously crafted. But as soon as I stepped aboard, something felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy with an eerie stillness. The first few days passed like any normal cruise, but on the fourth night, things changed. I couldn't sleep. My room was freezing, far colder than it should have been. I wandered the halls, hoping to clear my head. The ship was silent, eerily so, with only the distant hum of the engines breaking the quiet. As I passed by one of the grand staircases, I saw her, a woman dressed in an old-fashioned gown, standing at the top. She was looking out into the distance, her face pale and expressionless. I blinked, and she was gone. My pulse quickened. I tried to tell myself I was just tired, but deep down, I knew what I had seen. The next night, it got worse. I was lying in bed when I heard it. Faint music. It sounded like a string quartet playing a mournful tune, but it was the middle of the night, and the halls were empty. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. The music led me to the grand ballroom. The room was filled with people, all dressed in clothing from 1912. They danced, laughed, and drank as if it were a normal evening. But their faces were wrong. Pale, lifeless, their eyes hollow and vacant. They were ghosts, spirits trapped in the final moments before the ship's disaster. I stumbled back, horrified, but no one seemed to notice me. The music continued, growing louder, more frantic. I could feel the ship tilting beneath me, just slightly at first, then more pronounced. Water dripped from the walls, and the temperature dropped even further. I ran, desperate to escape. But no matter where I went, I heard the voices, the screams, the splashing water, the terror of those final moments from over a century ago. I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, but the icy water that began seeping through the floors told me otherwise. On the last night of the voyage, I woke to the sound of rushing water. My room was flooding. I threw open the door, but the hallway was submerged. Panic gripped me as I fought to find an escape route. I made it to the deck, and that's when I saw it. The ocean was calm, the stars bright above, but the original Titanic was there. Half sunken, broken in half, and shrouded in fog. The dead walked the decks, their faces twisted in pain, calling for help, their voices drowning in the cold night air. I don't know how I made it through the rest of that night. I don't know if anyone else saw what I did, or if they even believed me, but the Titanic never sank. Not completely. It's still out there, drifting through the icy waters, trapped between the world of the living and the dead. And I'll never forget the faces of those who are still waiting for the final plunge.
My name is Ethan Mills, and I'll never forget the night I took that cursed subway. It still haunts me. It was late, and I missed the last bus. I had no choice but to take the subway. The platform was deserted, save for a flickering light that buzzed above. The train arrived silently, no screeching brakes, no rumble, just there. The doors slid open, and I hesitated. The car was empty, no conductor, no passengers, but I stepped in. Exhausted, I slumped into a seat as the train lurched forward. I glanced at the display screen to check the upcoming stops. It was blank. No station names, just static. Suddenly, the train slowed. It stopped at a station I didn't recognize. The sign on the wall was broken, but I could make out part of it, something gate. The air smelled like decay. As I peered out onto the platform, my heart sank. There was someone standing in the far corner. The figure was tall and still. I couldn't see a face, just a shadowy silhouette. As I stared, it took a slow step toward the train. My pulse quickened. The doors started closing, and I backed away, watching the figure inch closer. Before the doors shut, I caught a glimpse of its face, empty, hollow eyes in a pale face. The train jerked forward, leaving the station behind. I sat down, shaking. What the hell was that? My mind tried to rationalize it, but unease gnawed at me. And then the lights flickered. The flickering grew more intense. With each burst of darkness, the temperature in the car dropped. I heard breathing. It wasn't mine. It was slow and raspy. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and in the dark, I felt them, figures surrounding me, pressing in. A voice whispered, "Join us." I swung around, but no one was there. The lights blinked back on, and I was alone again, but the air was thick with something I couldn't see. I needed to get off. The train slowed again, and the doors hissed open. I bolted, stumbling onto the platform. But there was no exit. Just an empty, endless platform stretching into darkness. Behind me, the train hadn't left. Its doors remained open, as if waiting for me to return. I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate. I turned, but saw nothing. The train doors finally slid shut, and it disappeared into the tunnel. I was left alone in the cold, silent darkness, with only those footsteps behind me. I never took that subway line again. Now I walk, no matter how late it is. Because I know if I ever get on that train again, I might never come back.
My name is Sarah, and I wish I'd never come back to campus for homecoming. It had been 5 years since I graduated from Hollowbrook University. I was excited to reunite with my friends, relive old memories, and attend the big homecoming party. The campus looked the same as it always had: sprawling ivy-covered buildings, towering oak trees, and the familiar cobblestone paths. But something about it felt different, darker somehow. The party was being held in the old gymnasium, the same place where all the major events had been back when I was a student. But as I approached the building that night, the air around it felt thick, heavy with an unexplainable tension. The once lively campus now seemed empty, hollow. My friends joked about the old curse of Hollowbrook, how the gym was built on the remains of an ancient burial ground. We laughed it off, just like old times. But deep down, I couldn't shake the unease settling in. As soon as we stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The gym was packed with people, but the air was stifling and cold, the lights flickering ever so slightly, the music blared, and the crowd was lively, but there was something off about the energy. It was as though the room was filled with a dark, unseen presence, lurking just beneath the surface. Then it started. One of my friends, Amy, disappeared. We all assumed she just wandered off to get drinks or meet someone, but as time passed, she didn't come back. We split up to search for her, and that's when things got truly terrifying. The farther I walked from the crowd, the darker the gym seemed to become. The music faded, replaced by whispers, faint at first, then louder. I turned down a hallway, and the whispers turned to sobs. A chill ran down my spine. At the end of the corridor, I saw her, Amy, standing with her back to me. "Amy?" I called out. She didn't move. My heart raced as I approached her, reaching out. When I touched her shoulder, she turned. Her face was blank, expressionless, her eyes wide and empty. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, just the soft, echoing whisper of voices that didn't belong to her. Before I could react, she collapsed to the ground, and I stumbled back in horror. I ran back to the main hall, but it wasn't the same anymore. The gym, once filled with partygoers, was almost empty. The few people left had the same blank, hollow expressions as Amy. They moved slowly, like they were trapped in some kind of trance. My phone buzzed. A text from one of my other friends: "Get out now. Don't look back." I didn't hesitate. I sprinted toward the exit, heart pounding, the whispers growing louder with each step. As I reached the doors, I dared a glance behind me. The gym was now completely dark, but there were shapes, shadowy figures, emerging from the corners of the room, their hollow eyes fixed on me. I burst through the doors into the night air, gasping, shaking. My phone buzzed again. Another message: "It's the curse. Don't come back." I never did. None of us from that night ever returned to Hollowbrook. No one talks about what happened at that homecoming. I hear rumors, though, about how the university denies anything strange happened, about how more students have disappeared since then. Whatever haunts that campus, it's still there, and it's waiting.
My name is Emma, and I wish I'd never opened that suitcase. I had just moved into a small, old apartment. It wasn't much, but it was cheap. The landlord warned me about the basement, full of junk left by former tenants. Of course, curiosity got the better of me one day. The basement was dark and smelled of mildew. Among the piles of forgotten belongings, a small, battered suitcase caught my eye. It was covered in dirt, as though it had been abandoned for decades. Something about it drew me in, despite the warning in the back of my mind. I opened it, and inside were old clothes and at the bottom, a strange, cracked doll. Its eyes were wide and glassy, staring up at me. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off. Next to the doll was an old photograph, a family of 3. The little girl in the photo looked just like the doll. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing soft creaks outside my bedroom door. The apartment was old, so I tried to ignore it. But the noises got louder, like footsteps. I got up to check, nothing. The place was empty. The next day, things got worse. Lights flickered constantly, and objects moved. I'd place something down, and moments later, it would be on the floor or across the room. The air grew colder. Then, I noticed the doll sitting on my living room table. I hadn't brought it up from the basement. I threw the doll and suitcase away, but that night, I woke up to the sound of giggling. The room was pitch black, but I felt something watching me. When I turned on the light, the doll was at the foot of my bed, its cracked face smiling. Terrified, I grabbed it and rushed to the basement. I shoved it back into the suitcase and left it in the farthest corner. As I turned to leave, I saw her, the little girl from the photograph. She stood at the top of the stairs, watching me, her eyes filled with anger. I woke up in my apartment, unsure how I'd gotten back. The suitcase and doll were gone, but I knew they weren't really gone. I moved out the next day, but every night since, I hear those same creaks outside my door and the faint sound of giggling. The suitcase isn't done with me yet.